The Israelites had just been through an amazing journey. God had called Moses to lead more than 500,000 people out of Egypt and into the Promised Land. Miraculous, risky, brave. It's true that they were enslaved, but this was not necessarily the slavery that we think of, that we are most familiar with, for example, the chattel slavery in America. In Egypt, some of the slaves were wealthy. Some were rich. Some were powerful. And when they left Egypt, they took with them lots of things on the backs of pack animals, including food for the journey, the bones of Joseph, and their treasures. What an amazing thing that Moses was able to release God's people from Egypt. You would think that that would have been enough, if only. 45 days later, their food stores were getting a little low. Today's scripture tells us that the whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hands of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." And then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the people, I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people will go out and gather enough for that day. And in this way, I will test them, whether they will follow my instruction or not." You would think that that would have been enough, if only. The Israelites traveled on for a bit, and then people were complaining that Moses had brought them out of Egypt to die of thirst in the desert. And God helped Moses fix that too. You would think that that would have been enough, if only. God called Moses to come up Mount Sinai and receive the law. Moses was gone for a long time, and the Israelites got bored waiting for him. And so they crafted for themselves an idol of a golden calf. You would think that that would have been enough, if only. After they left Mount Sinai, almost 2.5 years into their wilderness journey, Scripture tells us, the rabble among them had a strong craving, and the Israelites wept again and said, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we used to eat in Egypt for nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onion, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at." And Moses heard the people weeping. Then the Lord became very angry, and Moses was displeased. So Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you treated your servant so badly? Why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay all of the burden of the people on me? Did I conceive all of these people? Did I give birth to them so that you should say to me, 'Carry them in your bosom, as a nurse carries a suckling child, to the land that you promised on oath to their ancestors?' Where am I to get meat to feed all of these people? For they come weeping to me, saying, 'Give us meat to eat.' I am not able to carry these people alone. They are too heavy for me. And if this is the way that you are going to treat me, God, then put me to death at once, if I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my misery." And God told Moses to tell the people that God had heard them wailing. If only we had meat to eat, surely it was better for us in Egypt. And God said to Moses, "Tell the people, therefore, God will give you meat, and you will eat. You will not eat only 1 day or 2 days or 5 days or 10 days or 20 days, but for a whole month on meat, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you, because you have rejected God who is among you, and you have wailed before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? You would think that that would have been enough, if only. God gave them meat to eat, and all of those who complained and were greedy got terribly ill. That same year, Moses sent spies to the promised land. Some of these spies wanted to go back to Egypt. They had much better lives in Egypt than they had in the wilderness, and that they would have to create for themselves in the promised land. They wanted to go back to Egypt, and so they reported back that the land, the promised land, was inhospitable and filled with warring giants. Then all of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to Moses and Aaron, if only we had died in the land of Egypt. If only we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to die by the sword? It would be better for us to go back to Egypt. So let's find a captain. Let us choose a captain and go back to Egypt. That's when 2 of the spies repented and came forward and said, the land that we went through as spies flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are no more than bread to us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. You would think that would have been enough, if only. That's when the whole congregation picked up stones and threatened to stone the truth-telling spies. Moses was very understandably upset. Things were very bad for Moses, but they were about to get a whole lot worse. Years before, when God had appointed Aaron, a rich cousin was upset because he felt that his son had a greater claim genealogically. He felt that his son was a more appropriate choice. But he didn't say or do anything. He waited for a more opportune time. His name was Korach. And that time was a time like this one. Before, even if there had been discomfort or grumbling, Moses had done wonderful things for the people, leading them out of Egypt, getting them manna and water, and asking God to forgive them and spare them several times. But now, they're not headed back to Egypt, and they're not in the promised land. Because of what has happened, they are miserable in the desert again. And it clearly is all Moses' fault. At this time, even before the Red Sea, all this time, there were 2 men who had it in for Moses. And Jewish tradition tells us that after Moses killed the Egyptian, that one of these 2 men went to Pharaoh and pointed the finger at Moses. And actually, tradition says that that same man was the one that Moses had saved from the Egyptian. So he saved him, and then he went and tattled. All through this wilderness journey, Jewish tradition tells us that these 2 men were the ones who had been complaining about the conditions, the ones who had been complaining about Moses' leadership, saying, he does not know what he's doing. We need to go back to Egypt. And that is when the 3 men get together, this time, following their second wandering in the wilderness. They start whispering and gossiping, and before you know it, all of their friends and family and neighbors know that Moses is a bad leader who makes selfish decisions and cuts holy people out of worship, out of leadership. But Korah could not say to the people that he wanted Moses' job for himself or for his son. He could not lead a rebellion for a selfish purpose. So he made up some excuses as he tried to gain supporters. He represented himself as an everyman, a representative of the ordinary person. And he told everyone that he believed that every person should be a leader. That this was not about Korah at all. This was about the entirety of the nation of Israel. Why should Moses and Aaron be the ones who make up the laws? Why should Moses and Aaron be the prophets when anybody can do it? Well, one thing led to another, and God gets involved again, this time with a spectacular seismic event that creates an abyss that swallows up these 3 men and their 250 supporters. Korah was a prophet. He was what we would consider to be a good person. He was what we would consider to be a righteous person. I don't think that he ever set out to be the leader of a rebellion. Korah's great failing was that he let his feelings fester, and he found excuses to behave in ways that a righteous person does not behave. Korah's feeling that he was right, his feeling of outrage that God did not do what Korah thought he should do. Korah's anger expressed towards Moses, Korah's feelings made him feel even more and more convinced, convicted that he was right. These feelings became his excuses for his behavior, for gossiping, for hurting others, for bearing false witness. Korah let his feelings warp his own beautiful sense of righteousness. And as terrible of a bad guy as Korah is, as bad of a rap that we give him when we read Scripture, the truth is we all do this. We all make excuses for the little sins that we commit. We all allow our excuses to become a little broader, a little deeper, and that gives us the power to commit greater sins under the cloak of righteousness. And before we know it, we are in full-on rebellion, broadsiding people with our sin, brandishing it about left and right, even feeling holy and righteous about the way that we are hurting people. If only we could be satisfied with the gifts that God gives us. If only we were satisfied with ways that God has called us and other people to ministry. If only we could trust God and others to provide for us along the wilderness journey and allow ourselves to provide for them. If only we could put aside our own fears, our own disappointments, our own anxiety, and put our faith in God so that we could journey looking through the windshield at what is ahead of us rather than looking at the rearview mirror and seeing what has gone behind us. If only.